Imagine you read a book, right? And it just completely changes how you view money. Like you stay up until 2 in the morning taking furious notes, feeling like you were just handed the cheat code to the universe.
Oh yeah, that total paradigm shift feeling. It's powerful.
Exactly. So you follow its advice to the absolute letter. You leverage what the book calls good debt, and you go out and buy 2 rental properties. You think, you've plotted the perfect escape route from the daily grind.
But then reality sort of catches up with you.
Right. Fast forward just 2 years. You are 37 years old. You have 0 savings. You're drowning in like $22,000 of high-interest credit card debt.
Wow. That's incredibly stressful.
And you are forced to sell both of those rental properties at a massive loss,
Yeah.
literally just to stop the financial bleeding.
It's a devastating scenario. And honestly, the true tragedy is just how frequently we see this exact sequence of events play out in today's economy.
That's the terrifying part. Because this isn't some hypothetical cautionary tale. This is the documented, true story of a reader named Derek. And it's the perfect, if slightly painful, starting point to welcome you to today's deep dive.
It really sets the stage for what we're digging into today.
Yeah, so today we are taking a microscope to Robert Kiyosaki's massive 1997 bestseller, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. But we're doing something specific.
Yeah.
We are looking at its core principles strictly through the lens of the year 2026.
Which is a vital exercise. I mean, we are talking about a book that has sold over 44 million copies globally. It fundamentally shaped the financial psychology of, well, an entire generation of investors.
Right, but the economic terrain has shifted dramatically since the late 90s. So we've got a really compelling stack of sources to help us unpack this. We're pulling from recent 2026 retrospective reviews by Brevo Capital and McPhee Insurance.
We also have some highly critical Reddit threads from personal finance communities, plus deep dive wealth management analyses from places like White Coat Investor.
And of course, the original text of the book itself. So the mission for today's deep dive is to figure out, is this book the ultimate, timeless playbook for financial freedom? Or has its advice quietly morphed into a dangerously incomplete trap today?
To understand how someone like Derek could follow the playbook perfectly and still lose everything, we first have to understand the philosophy that convinced him to jump in.
Right. The whole mindset shift.
Exactly. Kiyosaki built this empire on a fundamental paradigm shift regarding how the wealthy view money compared to the middle class.
And he illustrates that with this very specific origin story. In the book, he talks about being 9 years old, growing up in Hawaii. He goes to work for his best friend's father, the rich dad, dusting cans in a convenience store for like 10 cents an hour.
Which, even back then, wasn't much.
No, not at all. So he gets so frustrated by the low pay that he marches in to demand a raise. But instead of giving him a raise, Rich Dad takes away his pay entirely. He tells the kid to work for free.
Which, I mean, sounds like a massive labor violation on the surface.
Oh, totally.
But look at the psychological framing there. Rich Dad was administering a calculated lesson. He wanted to break the boy's reliance on a paycheck, a predictable hourly wage. It conditions the human brain to stop looking for asymmetric upside.
Because you're just trading time for a set amount of dollars.
Right. Rich Dad was basically forcing the boys to open their eyes and look for opportunities that everyone else missed, because everyone else was too busy staring at the clock waiting for their shift to end.
And it actually worked. Because they weren't getting paid, the boys started looking at the store differently. They noticed the manager was throwing away old comic book covers.
The comic book library is such a great example.
Yeah. So they negotiated to keep the comics, moved them into a basement, and started this private library. They charged the neighborhood kids 10 cents for admission, hired a peer to run the door, and suddenly they were making $9.50 a week in passive income.
Without having to physically be there. And that childhood story really encapsulates the entire foundational premise of the book. Kiyosaki argues that wage earners and the middle class work for money, driven by an endless cycle of 2 emotions, fear and greed.
Fear of not having enough and greed for nicer things.
Exactly. The fear forces them to work hard, and the greed makes them spend everything they earn. The wealthy step completely outside that emotional cycle. They figure out how to build systems that make money work for them.
I always think of like a high salary without financial literacy as being handed a VIP ticket to a fancier hamster wheel.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to put it.
Right. Like you're making a lot more money, but you're just buying bigger liabilities.
Yeah.
You upgrade to the luxury car lease, the massive mortgage, the extravagant vacations. You're running twice as fast, but you're still locked in the exact same cage.
You're hitting on the core issue there, and that brings us to the most defining and polarizing concept in Kiyosaki's entire framework, his definition of assets versus liabilities.
Yes, the accounting stuff.
He completely throws out complex, traditional accounting jargon and just strips it down to brutal simplicity. To him, an asset is something that puts money into your pocket every single month. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where he makes his most famous claim, and I have to push back on it. He states, flat out, your house is not an asset.
The golden rule of rich dad, poor dad.
Right. But every traditional financial advisor I've ever heard says real estate is the bedrock of middle-class wealth. How can he realistically claim that a house, which traditionally appreciates in value, is a liability?
Well, what's fascinating here is how he forces the reader to redefine financial literacy. Traditional accountants look at a house, see its market value, and list it on a balance sheet as a net worth asset.
Which makes sense to most people.
Sure, but Kiyosaki doesn't care about your hypothetical net worth. He cares strictly about cash flow. Think about owning a primary residence. You've got a monthly mortgage payment, property taxes, insurance, constant maintenance.
The roof leaks, the heater breaks.
Yeah, exactly. Every single month, regardless of what the housing market is doing, that house requires cash to leave your bank account. Therefore, in his strict cash flow framework, it is a liability.
Our sources actually provide some vital nuance on this point for 2026. The investment analysis from Maher Sam notes that while Kiyosaki is technically correct about the cash flow drain, he ignores human behavior.
Human behavior is the wild card, always.
Right. A house provides forced savings. Most people lack the discipline to invest, but they will always pay their mortgage to avoid eviction. Plus, it provides stability, which you can't strictly measure on a balance sheet.
But the source ultimately agrees with his broader philosophy, right?
Yes, they agree that your primary home is a necessity, not a wealth-building vehicle. It's the second home, the rental property, where someone else's rent flows into your pocket, that qualifies as a true asset.
That distinction is everything. The wealthy focus their energy entirely on building that asset column first. Income-producing real estate, automated businesses, dividend equities. Only when those generate a surplus do they buy the luxury cars or the big primary homes.
I get the concept, but practically speaking, I'm putting myself in the shoes of a listener who is working 50 hours a week just to keep the lights on. How does someone in that position actually find the time or capital to acquire assets without going bankrupt?
To answer that, we have to look at his famous mental model for categorizing income, the cash flow quadrant. He divides the working world into 4 psychological profiles: E, S, B, and I.
Okay, break those down for us.
The left side features the E for employee, or wage earner, and the S for self-employed. The right side features B for business owner and I for investor.
And the psychology behind each letter is what makes it stick. Wage earners in the E quadrant value security above all else. They trade their time for a safe contract, benefits, a predictable paycheck.
Exactly. Then you drop down to the S quadrant, the self-employed. Independent contractors, freelance designers, local doctors. Their driving need is independence. That if you want it done right, do it yourself, perfectionist mindset.
But the sources highlight a massive vulnerability in the S quadrant, right? Nationally, about 90% of these self-employed ventures fail within 5 years.
Because it's mechanical. A self-employed person doesn't actually own a business, they simply own a job. If the freelance designer gets sick, the income drops to 0 instantly. They are the bottleneck.
Which is fundamentally different from the B quadrant, the business owner. They don't do the work, they build the systems. They hire the smart people from the E and S quadrants to run things.
Right. A true business owner can sit on a beach for a year and return to a more profitable company.
And finally, you have the ultimate destination, the I quadrant, the investor. This is the pure deployment of capital. It's his classic monopoly strategy. You buy 4 greenhouses, let the cash flow accumulate, and trade them up for 1 red hotel.
The holy grail of the Kiyosaki method.
But here's where it gets really interesting, but also a bit suspicious to me. It's like those drawing tutorials where step 1 is draw a circle, and step 2 is draw the rest of the owl.
Yeah, draw the rest of the owl, yeah.
It's just too big of a leap. Is it really that simple for someone in the employee quadrant to just skip the grueling process of building a business and instantly become an investor by taking out loans for greenhouses?
That assumption is the exact trap that catches thousands of readers. Our source from the Social Chameleon Show coined a brilliant term for this: the illusion of the I quadrant.
The illusion of the I quadrant. I like that.
What typically happens is an employee reads the book, gets a rush of adrenaline, and immediately takes on massive debt to buy a duplex. But they haven't built a business entity, they have no systems, no property
So
managers.
they aren't actually operating as an investor at all.
Not even close. They just purchased a highly leveraged, incredibly stressful secondary job. They are firmly trapped in the S quadrant.
Answering panicked phone calls about broken toilets at 2 a.m.
Exactly. Chasing late rent, stressing over evictions, all while desperately needing their day job to keep the house of cards from collapsing.
And that illusion brings us straight back to Derek from our opening story. Let's look at why the specific mechanics of the book are failing people in 2026. Derek followed the rules. He used leverage.
To dissect Derek's failure, we must examine good debt versus bad debt. Bad debt is borrowing to acquire a liability, like a high-interest car loan. Good debt, theoretically, is borrowing money to buy an asset that pays for its own debt.
Right. You borrow from a bank, buy an apartment, the tenant pays rent, you cover the mortgage, and pocket the difference.
That sounds great in theory, but let's look at the math from our Brevo Capital and YouTube sources. When Kiyosaki wrote this in 1997, you could buy a starter property for roughly $100,000. With 5% mortgage rates, your carrying costs were low.
Rent easily covered the debt, taxes, and maintenance. Positive cash flow.
But step into 2026. That exact same median starter home is now pushing $450,000. And borrowing costs for investment properties are around 7 or 8%.
The monthly financial burden has basically quadrupled. But local wages haven't, so there's a hard ceiling on what you can charge for rent.
The margins haven't just shrunk. In many markets, they have completely evaporated. And this shift is precisely where Derek's plan disintegrated. He bought 2 properties with minimal down payments because the book said to maximize leverage. And crucially, he had 0 liquid cash reserves.
So if leverage is a tool for the wealthy, why did it destroy Derek? I mean, when a heating unit broke, costing $6,200 and his property sat vacant, the good debt literally suffocated him.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it comes down to the true nature of leverage. Leverage is simply a multiplier. When property values rise and tenants pay, it amplifies gains. But when a boiler explodes, it multiplies losses just as efficiently.
Right, it swings both ways.
Kiyosaki teaches the vision of leverage, but ignores the prerequisites, like having 6 to 12 months of liquid reserves for every single door you own.
Just sitting in a bank account. Which actually brings up an interesting comparison from the sources. We have Derek, and then we have Yvonne. Yvonne had the same 80 grand, but she just put it in a broad index fund.
A tiny slice of the global economy.
Yeah. She kept her job, automated her investments, and 10 years later, she had nearly $300,000. And she answered 0 calls about broken furnaces.
She let the market do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. And this points to a missing piece in the book's framework, which McPhee Insurance highlights. Kiyosaki says to hold cash for opportunities, but in 2026, idle cash loses to inflation.
The framework lacks a mechanism for storing capital safely with liquidity.
And McPhee Insurance brings up this concept called infant banking. Basically, instead of a standard bank account, you put your reserves into a specially designed, dividend-paying, whole life insurance policy.
Which builds cash value and earns guaranteed interest that outpaces standard bank inflation.
Right. And when an opportunity pops up or a boiler breaks, you don't withdraw the money. You borrow against your own policy. So your original capital keeps compounding, but you have the liquid funds to handle the real estate issue.
It solves the liquidity problem while shielding the capital. Because Derek didn't use a system like that. He wasn't investing. He was gambling that nothing would ever break.
So what does this all mean? If the messenger is this controversial and the tactical advice is outdated, do we just throw the whole book in the trash? Because it raises a massive question about Robert Kiyosaki himself. Can we trust him?
That is an incredibly complex question. If you look at the Reddit threads and the white coat investor analysis, the modern backlash against him is severe. Critics don't mince words, they call him a grifter.
They point to his own corporate bankruptcies.
Yes, and his promotion of highly speculative things like penny stocks and multi-level marketing schemes. Plus, his social media is essentially a daily megaphone for apocalyptic 2026 market crash predictions.
Telling everyone to hoard physical gold and silver.
Right. And he frames those crashes as opportunities, but that relentless doomsaying alienates a lot of professionals.
And what about the mystery of Rich Dad? Was he even real?
That's been debated for decades. Some journalists thought he was a composite character. Our sources mention research pointing to a Hawaiian hotel owner named Richard Wassman Kimi as the likely inspiration. But the fact that it's so debated undermines the trust.
And honestly, the book's condescending tone toward employees has aged so poorly. The Brevo Capital source points out that in 2026, a highly skilled tech worker making 400 grand with benefits is objectively wealthier and less stressed than a struggling small business owner working 70 hours a week.
Shaming someone for maximizing their earning potential in a stable career is just incredibly outdated advice.
So back to my question, do we discard the book?
This raises an important question about how we consume financial media. The consensus across our sources is no, you don't discard it, but you have to treat the book as a parable, not a textbook.
A parable. That makes perfect sense.
It is phenomenal for cognitive framing and behavioral finance, overcoming fear and greed. But it's terrible for concrete financial mechanics today.
Let's bring this all together for you listening right now. Building wealth is about understanding cash flow and acquiring assets, but you must trust but verify.
Absolutely, you don't have to quit a great W-2 job to be wealthy.
And you shouldn't blindly take on real estate debt without a safety net of liquid reserves, just because a book from 1997 said to do it.
Rigorous risk management is essential.
I want to end with a really powerful concept from the White Coat Investor source about the scarcity versus abundance mindset, specifically tying into a quote from Seth Godin.
It's a fantastic perspective shift.
There's this culture of aggressive deprivation right now. Eat rice and beans, suffer through a job you hate, just to hit a retirement number in 10 years. But Seth Godin asks, instead of treating your career like a prison you have to buy your way out of using real estate leverage, what if true wealth is simply designing a life you don't feel the need to escape from?
Escaping the rat race shouldn't mean spending 10 years living miserably just to hit a metric.
Exactly. So, as you move forward, think about how you were defining rich in your own life. Are you building a trap to escape a trap? Or are you designing a life you actually want to live today?